How's everyone doing this morning? So I'm going to basically be talking you through a little bit of the research that we've recently done at EFT. So the other part of my job title is Head of Research and Digital Content. So the I word, obviously it stands for innovation. And it's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of the industry's been facing today. It's also one of the biggest topics that we've seen trending currently in supply chain. You'll see that throughout the conference today. A lot of the sessions are going to be dropping the I word. So the diffusions of innovation theory is basically a theory that describes an innovation as it spreads through a population. You've probably seen this chart before. It's thrown around quite a lot throughout the industry. I'm basically going to be talking to you through three things today. One of them is going to be the connection between innovation and technology and the fact that those two ideas don't necessarily have to be tied together. Second, I'm going to be providing you with some research that we've just conducted on innovation with our audience of manufacturers, retailers, and logistics providers. We surveyed 151 of them, and I've got some of those results for you today. And based on some of that research, I'm also going to provide you with a little bit of a framework or some fresh ideas on how to approach innovation to perhaps help your strategies yourselves. So with some of that research, one of the key things we looked at was how innovation is actually spreading through the industry. So we asked all of the folks that we're working with in the industry to basically place themselves on this chart. And you're probably not surprised to know that they place themselves significantly towards the innovator end of the spectrum than the laggard end. We then had to ask them, of course, well, how do they rate their peers? How do other organizations rank up against them? And again, unsurprisingly, the peers are towards the laggard end of the spectrum. Ultimately, both are probably wrong. The research suggests that the diffusions of innovation theory is probably the more accurate of these two sort of trends here. And in fact, our research actually started to reveal some of the reasons for why this might be the case. So, for starters, maybe these companies aren't so comfortable with the innovation they're producing. So in fact, the majority of the respondents of our research said that their innovations weren't effective, or at least they weren't sure whether they were effective or not. Second of all, the majority of respondents said that they didn't actually have a formal innovation strategy. And by formal innovation strategy, we meant either a dedicated budget, a dedicated team, best practices, or even a built-in process to their organization. So why not? So we also asked them to define innovation. My personal favorite one is survival. But if you look through all of the different definitions of innovation, you found that they sort of shifted from looking at technology to looking at disruption. And there could be a good reason for that. And if you look at the media, and EFT is 100% complicit in this, that's what innovation is. And the problem with this is that it's expensive, it's intimidating, and it's also very difficult to measure. You know, there's things like predictive analytics and things like that, where the ROI is not necessarily proven, or there isn't a best practice yet driven to measure the success of such a thing. So I wanted to suggest, can we think differently actually about innovation? So what better place to start than with a definition of it? And if you look up the definition in the Oxford English Dictionary, you find that it's about change in something established, introducing new methods, ideas, or products. And so effectively, it is not about technology, it's really about this change. So is there a way that we can think differently about innovation that will help us here? And so I wanted to introduce the concept of Product 101. And some of you might have already used this framework, but it's a framework that the tech industry uses very, very heavily. And it effectively suggests that for every solution, you have a given problem for a given market. And what you get from that is value, which is the benefit provided to an economic agent. And so why is Product 101 so important for this industry right now? So first of all, this is how the big innovators describe themselves. And so by the big innovators, I'm talking about Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, those types of companies. And so I've anonymized them here, but if you look at the language they use, it's very, very product-centric. But beyond that, Product 101 really fits this definition of innovation. So if we look at the definition again, changes via new methods or ideas, that's kind of solutions, isn't it? And something established, that's kind of the problem. But the key thing that the definition misses out is it's for users. Innovation has to be for a user or a customer. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably here, but I'm sort of defining them as a user is for the internal organization, whereas the customer is the customer. And if we use that type of language to speak about this innovation triangle of Product 101, you actually find that the language helps shift the thinking in terms of what innovation really is. So instead of a problem, we can define it as a customer or a user's needs. And when you start to define things that way, you find that you can actually look at innovation in terms of studying the users. So innovation has to be started and end with the users or the customers. It means your perspective then shifts to their shoes, and you can actually then look at the processes they necessarily face throughout your organization and throughout how they interact with your organization. And that effectively allows you to stop firefighting and to fundamentally solve those problems that they might be facing when interacting with you. Secondly, if we define solution instead as meeting a user's needs, then you find that each feature addresses a specific user or customer need. And when you roll those all up into one, you end up with a product, and ultimately you could end up with disruption, depending on how impactful those features are as a whole. It also prevents you from feature creep because you're sticking specifically to a user's needs. It's not sort of pulling ideas out of thin air. The users are telling you exactly what they're looking for. And that enables you to prioritize exactly what you need to be doing. You'll know which customers obviously are going to be more important to your organization, so you can focus your innovation on that direction rather than just sort of haphazardly. It also allows you to avoid assumptions. Again, because the user's defining everything that you're going to be doing, you aren't going to be going off piece, you're not going to be spending money here and there, and this is going to help you minimize your risk. Ultimately, so the benefits then become the value created for users. And this is really beneficial, especially to the marketing or sales team, or to like an IT team who's implementing something internally. And the fact of the matter is that this paves a clear path to our ROI, and it also helps you define the success of your innovation. So that's all great, but what are some examples of this? Again, innovation isn't necessarily these tech examples. It can actually be sort of very small changes that users have driven that result in a benefit. So here's one example, and many of you have probably seen this before, but this is a bicycle company that were getting a lot of complaints from their customers that their bicycles were arriving damaged. And so there's a lot of ways you can approach that problem. You could look at the packaging, you could look at your last mile provider, et cetera. But what they realize is without having to disrupt very much in their current process, they could print a TV screen on the outside of their box for their bicycle, and us as humans naturally react with caution around a large rectangular box with a TV screen printed on it because you think a TV's inside. So as a result, damaged products plummeted. Here's another example. I don't know if you ever tried to lift a washing machine before, but for a box that's just an empty drum, they're really, 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 really heavy. And the reason for that is they contain a cement brick at the top and at the bottom. So there's a company in the UK that's been exploring this sort of conundrum, the really heavy washing machine that requires multiple delivery men, that requires an installation team from a customer's perspective. You need someone to remove your old one. It's not something you can just sort of throw in the back of your car. And what they realize is you can just replace those cement bricks with a big water reservoir. Obviously, cement and water have different densities, so a bigger water reservoir, and you can just fill it up at the destination, thus reducing the weight that you're transporting across the whole network. And so finally, this is an EFT example, and I'll let you guess who was the one ordering the football. But when you're buying a football online, this was a shockingly expensive ball. And so we were sort of talking amongst each other, and we were suggesting, well, why didn't they just ship this deflated? That would make so much sense, wouldn't it? But this one's a bit of a red herring. The fact of the matter is EFT's filled with millennials, and when we want a football, we want to play with the football now, not sort of tomorrow or the day after that. So, in fact, this company had done some research on their customer. They had realized that you want to receive your football game ready. So going back to those definitions of innovation that we were looking at the beginning, we found that of the 262 definitions we received, only 36 mentioned customer and none mentioned user. And I guess the key thought I wanted to leave you with as we enter into the conference today was maybe it's time to innovate how we innovate. Maybe you need to think of the customer and the user as the driving force of your innovation.